This morning I'd like to ask you, what do you dream about? What do you dream about for your country? What do you dream about for yourself? Now, when I spoke about what do you dream about, many people will tell you they don't even remember the dream from the previous night. But I want to ask you, when you speak to your children, do you ask them, hey, what do you dream about of becoming one day when you're big? I love that phrase, when you're big. There was a story of a wonderful young man by the name of Monty Roberts. Monty was at school the one day, and his teacher asked him and said to him, listen, he was in high school, and the teacher said, I want you guys to sit down and I want you to visualize what your future will be like. He says, I want you to tell us tomorrow or a week later exactly what you want to, but I want you to really have great detail in what you are thinking about for the future. So Monty sat down and he wrote an extensive plan. He said in great detail, he says, well, my dream is the following. And he drew a diagram of a 200-acre farm that he wanted to live on. And on the farm, with great details, he outlined how the ranch was going to be situated near a river. In fact, he also worked out how the water reticulation would work on the farm to get to his stables, to get to his fields, so that he could, in fact, then have food for his horses. And she asked him, what would you dream about? She says, I want to have the biggest horse ranch in the county. And he says, what else do you want? He says, well, I saw a movie and I saw a 4,000-foot ranch house. And I know exactly which one I want. And he turned in his paper, and the teacher looked at this and she says to him, please, I want you to meet me after class. She looked at it and she gave him an F. And he looked at her and he says, ma'am, what do you mean? She says, well, it's an unrealistic dream for a young man like you. You have no money, you have no resources. And owning a horse ranch will require a lot of money. You have to have the money to buy land. You need to pay stud fees. You need to buy breeding stock. And there's no ways that you could ever get it and ever do it. He says, I want you to tone it down to a more realistic dream. And so Monty went home. He sat down. And for that paper, by the way, he got an F. And he looked at it and he says, went home and he said, I will do that, ma'am. He sat with the paper and he went through it line by line, but he made no changes to it at all. And he said to the teacher, you keep your F and I will keep my dream. This is in fact a true story that Monty Roberts owned he owns a 4,000 square foot house in the middle of a 200-acre horse ranch. And it's ironic that much of the detail is exactly as he planned it as a young man at school. You will notice, brethren, that men and women who accomplish much are people who have a dream to accomplish it. They work hard, they are focused, they are not easily distracted, they are not easily intimidated, and they get on with what they need to do. If you look at inventors, if you look at explorers, these people accomplish great things. But what actually happens is that they are captivated by a dream that is bigger than themselves, a dream that is far more important than any of the mundane things that get thrown at them daily. And so they focus on that at all. Helen Keller was one of the finest people this world has ever seen. And Helen Keller, if you don't know, was a blind lady. We actually drove past her house in Florence, Alabama. But she made this quote many years ago that really impacted me, where she says, the only thing worse than being blind is having sight without vision. In fact, if you can see and you aren't having a vision for your life and asking yourself those hard questions, what would I like to accomplish in my life? In our Wednesday night class, we've been looking at the life of Joseph, and I purposely avoided these subjects because these are aspects that we as a broader community can deal with. When we speak about the life of Joseph, Joseph was one of the most amazing people that certainly inspired my life. We're going to be looking at a lot of things about this man. We looked at his dream. We also looked at the dysfunctionality of the family last week by way of introduction. We looked at the favoritism that obviously raised the ire of the other children. In Genesis chapter 37, we also discover that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob really left the family dysfunctionally. Jacob had 2 wives, 2 concubines, and 12 sons with 1 daughter. And so as we look at this, we can typically see a really classic blended family. But in verse 1, we see this text of chapter 37. Jacob lived in the land of his father's sojournings. In the land of Canaan, Joseph, being 17 years old, was pasturing the flock of with his brothers. He was a boy with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives. Joseph brought a bad report of them to their fathers. And now Israel, that's another name for Jacob, loved Joseph more than any other of his sons. Because he was the son of his old age, he made him a robe of many colors. But when his brothers saw that his fathers loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peacefully to him. Right off the top, you find that here's a classic case of not loving children the same. Not caring for children the same. But I also wanted us to see last week that within that dysfunctionality, that God truly used the situation for the good. And when you really start studying and read the story and the nuance, and this is the beauty of the Bible, that it covers up nothing. But it also tells you and shows you about the impact of God's hand within that environment and how that actually changes for the good. Oh man, old Jacob just loved Joseph, his firstborn son, from his favorite wife, Rachel. We find that what he does is extraordinary. He decides to give his son a coat. But I want you to also see that one of the translations that one can consult with is that one of the translations says it was a coat with long sleeves. Now, a coat with long sleeves was specifically used for those people who never really worked with their hands. And so it signified very early in the life of their child that he wasn't going to be working very hard like his brothers were. And so right off the top, we find that there was jealousy of the worst order. And the text tells us in verse 1, it tells us that his brothers could not speak peacefully about him. And so it's a very tragic start in the life of this young man, disadvantaged by his father's preference and favoritism. But there's a wonderful nuance that comes in verse 5 that says, now Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. They said, hear this dream that I have dreamed. Behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and behold, my sheaf rose and stood upright, and behold, your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaves. He says his brothers said to him, Are you indeed to reign over us? Or are you indeed to rule over us? So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. And then he dreamed another dream and told this to his brothers as well, and said, Behold, I've dreamed another dream. Behold, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars were bowing down to me. And when he told it to his father and to his brothers, his father rebuked him and said to him, What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow ourselves to the ground before you? And his brothers were jealous, but his father kept the saying in mind. We will definitely travel through the life of this young man. We will see just how Potiphar's wife plays into this beautiful narrative. We'll talk about some of the dream killers that he came across, but that's for later. And what they used to say about this cat in verse 19, they say, well, here comes the dreamer, and then here's the sad part. They made arrangements to kill him. And then we will see what happens to his dreams. You see, here's the story. Maybe we should change the word dream to the idea of aspiration, of goals, and maybe a much better name is to use vision. In other words, let's maybe look and change the concept that is more translatable for us and say, what is your vision, not only for your life, but also for the life of your children, and in the third place, the life for this community of faith in which we live? What do you dream of when you're lying on your bed to maybe even change this world into a better place? What do you dream of in your working environment where you work with colleagues from various groups and disparate backgrounds? Where you're dealing with people that are hurting so badly? What do you dream of when you see them coming into your area of influence, and how you will let them leave your environment, having been in an encounter with you? What do you dream about? Joseph had dreams while he was asleep. And those dreams were so vivid that he could literally see everything very clearly. We also see that Monty Roberts had a dream of owning a horse ranch as a young man. And sometimes you will find that you will go through terrible humiliation because people say, if I take where you're now and where you kind of want to be, and I look at what you have to get there, I've got to say to you, you're wasting your time. But you see, we found that Joseph, in the process, by his own family, suffered humiliation, injustice. He was thrown into prison. And all the way through, there is one thing that kept Joseph alive, and that was the dream that he had, because he understood that is what God had in mind for him. And let me ask you a question. When you look at your heart's desire, the deepest heart's desire, and I'm not talking about selfish aims and objectives, I'm talking about something that is beyond you, something far greater, something literally beyond your resources, that literally, physically and absolutely honestly, you cannot achieve. I'd like to just make 3 points this morning. We all need to dream and have a vision. We all need to ask the question, what about the possibilities for this future? Even in the midst of a massive storm where the waters are high, a captain has to have a vision. And even if his vision is as simple and as uncomplicated as just getting the ship to port completely whole and all those who are on this boat to safety, then that is the vision. In other words, he will maneuver the boat through those obstacles and he will get there. Let me ask you, what's your dream? What is your dream 5 years from now, 10 years down the road? Let me ask you, will you be around in 5 years? Now, you might have a very morbid view of it and say, well, I don't know, I'm 80 now or 85, No. This is not about morbidity. This is about the kind of view that Caleb had. He was over 90 or 90 odd years old. And when he was told that, hang on a minute, the Philistine territory is yours, he got his gear on and he says, well, let's go and take it because that's my inheritance. The picture around is, what do you dream about now? Is there a way that you maybe ask it as simple and as complex as, all I want to dream about is to know God better. I not only want to know God better, but I want to work in an environment in where I am and try to influence people for Christ. This past week, yesterday, we laid to rest the memory of a wonderful man, Dereck Beukes, 99 years old. And his children told him that he needed to go to a retirement village, and he was not impressed because he always believed that those are for old people. And eventually he rocked up there very reluctantly when he was very weak, and they said, "Jou vragtig." Even though he was over 90, over 95, he was up every single day talking to people about Jesus in the retirement village. Because as far as he's concerned, he wasn't old yet, and he needed to speak to people. You see, when we talk about these kind of visions, let me ask you a question, is that when you have a vision, you fundamentally work from this and say, this is where I am now. These are the knowns. But that is where I really want to be. That is where I want to be. That's the concept that I'm shooting for. That's the role I am shooting for. That's my goal that I'm shooting for. Now, the in-betweens you can work out later on, but for now, that's pretty much where I want to be. Maybe you want to be a better wife or a better husband. You want to be a better father or a better mother. You want to be somebody that just wants to be a better neighbor to people around you. And let me say this to you, Brendan, if you aim for nothing, you will hit it. Quite spot on. On a broader sense, let me ask you, what do you have in mind, your vision for this congregation? We'll talk about that in a lot more detail a little bit later. What view do you have? Do you want to have followers after you that says, well, how great you are? Or is it something that literally, with a clear conscience, you can say that I've done everything in my power to have a following after Jesus Christ, and every single person that I've encountered, that I've influenced, was for Jesus Christ and Him alone? Sunday school class teacher spoke to the children, called them in and said, I want you to go into your backyard tomorrow, and I want you just to count the stars for me. The next Sunday morning, the children arrived at the Sunday school. One child says, you know what, I just saw 100 stars. The other one said, no, I saw 1,000 stars. And another boy said, I've got 1,000,000 stars that I counted. And there was a little boy in the class, and they asked him, how many did you find? He said, well, I just saw 3 stars, miss. And the lady says, excuse me? 3? He says, ma'am, you don't understand. We've got a small yard. Many years ago, and I owe a great debt to Shirley and Quibus, we went to Sutherland, and I remember this night as clear as it was yesterday. They had a small patch of grass right outside the back door, and we were lying on our backs, looking into the Milky Way. There were no cosmic dust. It was beautiful. It was as if you could lie there and reach out to the stars and touch it with your hand, and just be able to scoop out a little bit of that beautiful array of stars and be able to see what it's about, and really just enjoy that moment. And sometimes our life is just so occupied and just blocked by cosmic dust and rubbish around us that just comes in the way. Let me ask you, how big is your backyard? You see, when Arn made a comment the other day, he's a consultant, a church consultant, he was doing some surveys, and he asked the question, one simple question, and he said, why does your church exist? The church has been around for a lot of years, and out of all the thousands of churches that he had surveyed, 89% of them said, the church's purpose is to take care of my needs and my family needs. 11% said the purpose of the church is to win the world for Jesus Christ. What's your view? Is it about you and how the church can serve you? And have you turned into a spectator where the performance wasn't that good today, or we could have left that out this morning? The sermon wasn't just so lekker. Oh, his tie was skew. And are you ready for a performance? Or is this about the kingdom of God? You see, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what you think. It's about God anyway. And you see, it's you that constricts and constrains your vision in relation to God. And that is why it is so important that we start to have a broader vision. Story I heard when I was in my first year of management training. There were two shoe salesmen. They went to the Pacific Islands. And as they rocked up on this Pacific Island, they were selling shoes from opposite companies. And the one shoe salesman looked at these environment, and he said, he phoned back and he says to the company, he said, listen, I'll be back on the first plane back home. Nobody wears shoes on these islands. Same environment, different salesman. He's on the phone to his company in the States, and he says, I'd like you to load 40-foot containers full of various kind of shoes. He says, we've got children, we've got women, we've got men, we've got older people here. Send everything that you have. He says, you cannot believe there is so many shoes to be sold. These people do not wear shoes at all, but we need to put shoes on their feet. And let me say, when you look at the same circumstance, what do you see? When you look at people that have got alcoholism, people struggling with divorce and immorality, what do you do? How do you respond? Self-righteously looking at them and saying, these people are just not my type. Oh, I'm just so glad that I'm not like these people are. Or do you see a massive opportunity where God can reach into these people's lives, where God can change him through the gospel, which is the power of salvation, transform their lives back into the image of God through Jesus Christ, re-engineer, re-gear them for value in his kingdom. And like Philemon said, while he was in prison, Onesimus was in prison, he was useless, but now I'm sending him back to you and he's useful. Does that come into our vision? The other day I spoke to about 20 people, representatives all over Africa and part of Madagascar. There's a small group of people in this country that works with 100 countries worldwide. And all they do is they equip literally only about 18 people. They bring them through every month. And they work with them for a 3-month period. And I was honored to work with them just with a small aspect and then listen to what they do. And here's a picture that your vision is larger than you and larger than your resources are. Did you know in Madagascar, let me just say this to you very quickly, their worship style is every morning at 6 o'clock, they have worship, a full service from 5 till 6. And then people go to work. Every morning. In the second place, let me say this to you, that having a bigger dream than yourself is saying that God has the ability to accomplish anything. Anything. The 12 spies story is a profound story, where 10 of them said, there's no ways we can enter into Canaan. 2 of them said, we can. I want you to listen to this passage of scripture. He said, they spoke to all the congregation of the children of Israel, saying, the land we passed through to spy out is an exceedingly good land. If the Lord, listen, if the Lord delights in us, then he will bring us into this land and give it to us. A land which flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord, nor fear the people of this land, for they are our bread. Their protection has departed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them. This word in the Hebrew, and you're welcome to trace it, says God has removed the shield of protection over them. They are fair game. And he says, let's go. The third place, we must commit ourselves to this dream. You see, one guy made a comment many years ago, and I'll never forgot it. He says, anyone can have a dream. All you need to do is fall asleep. You see, let me ask you a question. There was a wonderful dean of students that asked the students of agriculture, and he was talking to a prospective student. He said to him, why did you choose this particular career? He says, well, I dream of making $1 million in farming, just like my dad. The dean was impressed and he says, "Your father made $1 million in farming?" He said, "No, but he always dreamed about it, and I will do the same." You see, brethren, let me say this to you. It takes hard work. It takes dedication. It takes focus. It takes unselfish sacrifice to make these things work. In Acts chapter 16, we see that taking the few steps for Paul was a difficult one, where Paul was asked to come to Macedonia, and he was given a vision by an angel that says, "Come, come." In Acts chapter 16, verse 10, he says, "Now after he has seen the vision, immediately he sought to go to Macedonia, concluded that the Lord has called us to preach the gospel to them." Let me ask you, what dream do you have for this congregation? You know, brethren, many of us who are now over 60, our time is coming to an end. We, our younger folk, need to take over. And the only way is to get into the game and get your shoulder to the wheel and start saying, "What can I do that's going to fundamentally influence the congregation for the better and for the next few years? And what can I commit to? What can I do that makes a fundamental difference?" If you know about the history of this congregation, it is a magnificent history filled with tremendous incidents of God's intervention that made this possible. And the vision of the folk that started this congregation way back are folk that had a vision in their mind that this would be a center and a collection point of God's people so that they could serve God. What's happened to that dream? Are we still playing games and just keeping home and saying, "Well, this is best we can do"? Or are we saying that we can do better? What's my dream? My dream is that we can meet the needs of everyone. And that means the spiritual needs as well as the physical needs. I have a dream that all of us will live together in harmony, loving and caring for one another. I dream that we will mutually be fed from the Word of God. I also dream the fact that all of us will be transformed into the image of Jesus Christ as we willfully submit to the will of God and to His service. I dream that every single one of us will be involved in ministry in some shape or form, discovering the richness and the glory of being able to serve someone in a real way that changes their life remarkably for the rest of their lives. I'm going to close off very quickly, and I'm going to talk about a man that was laid to rest yesterday, the memory of this man. In the 1940s, his parents went off, I think it's to Nigeria, and went to work there as missionaries. On their way back, on their visit to the family, they had a 2-year-old daughter with him, and his parents, his mom was pregnant with him. He was 6 months old. And as they came on land, the baby died of a fever. The baby was 2 years old. They were totally distraught because at that time there was a heavy fever up in the African area that was not under control. It was hard for his parents at the time, and they came back to South Africa and lived on a farm with his uncle. His uncle really fell in love with this young man, David. And then his parents were so nervous to take him back to the mission field. And the uncle said, "I'll take him. I will look after him." And he raised that boy as his own. David grew up to be a strong young man, very small. And those years, the missionary could only come back every 5 years. So by the time he was 10 years old, he'd only seen his parents twice after he was born. David knew that God had something far greater for him. And you see, when you listen to a man like that, you remember what your discussion was in his study many years ago. I never knew that detail. I never knew that he grew up without his mother. But what I did know is that when he started going to school, he really struggled with relationships. He struggled. He struggled to connect people, and we that have studied once or twice and probably read or heard about something called attachment theory know why he was so highly intellectually focused and developed and well advanced rather than emotionally connected to people. But that problem that he had uniquely prepared David for a very difficult time in South African history. He was behind so much of the changes that had taken place politically and religiously, that he would challenge the one part of an ethnic group to stop being disgustingly racist toward another group. It cost him his relationship in the community. It cost him to be thrown out, or rather rejected, from the white church, and he made his home in the colored church. You don't know this history. But he then poured his life into building people and building bridges, all his life. Why? Because he had a vision of what God had in mind for him. The discussion him and I had that day for 3 to 4 hours was very traumatic. I saw something that bothered me, and I asked him about it. And then he closed the door and he said, "Now I want to tell you what this is about." And then I understood so much of South African history. And here's what I want to say to you. I struggled, it'll challenge you to find anyone who had done more than him, Dr. Beyers Naudé, and Professor Jaap Durant, who turned their back on privilege to serve and make a reality of what God had called them, and that's to reconcile people. What has God called you to do? To reconcile families, to reconcile neighbors, to reconcile disparate economic groups and communities, and what did he call you to? Maybe something as innocuous and simple as solving the problem with cancer. Maybe that's one of the things you've been called to do. But if that's what God has called you to do, grab that vision. Take all your competencies and everything that you know and get involved and throw your weight behind it. And don't you ever draw a line on the boundaries that God is not able to take you. I don't know where you are. Maybe you're not a Christian today. Let me say this to you. If that is where you are, and you don't know Jesus, you haven't given your life to him, there's a limiting factor in your life. This is as far as you can go, as far as your competencies go. But when you turn to God, God lifts that lid and he says, "No, gaan ons saam praat. Now we're going to do magic together." Walking with God is one of the greatest things I could have done in my life and many others. And so, when you decide today to follow him, and maybe today you are just mediocre, you just think, I'm just cruising, no big deal, no biggie. Well, my friend, let me say this. God has called you to more than that. And so I want to encourage you to revisit those dreams that you've let lie and say, how can we revitalize that and get them where God wants us to be? Let's stand and sing our song of encouragement.